Ron Kinsley,
Here.
John Righeimer,
Here.
Stacy Hessel, Tom Duffy, Dale Schleter.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Next item is pledge allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Number 4, certification compliance open meeting laws.
This meeting has been noticed to the public and news media as required by section 19.84 of the Wisconsin statutes.
Thank you. Number 5, meeting agenda. The agenda is set. Number 6, public comment. Ms. Silmer.
Linda Zilmer, resident of the village of Birchwood, Edgewater property owner. And my public comment today is more a question that may be clarified further under agenda number 8 about this whole 2024 budget process. The budget hearing was held. There were a number of public comments, some in support of funding Waldo, finally phasing out Hayward Lakes Visitors and Convention Bureau funding, using excess sales tax revenues to offset ambulance costs for the town of Edgewater. And the public hearing was held. There was no response, but I think the indication was that at Finance Committee today in November, that some of those things would be taken up. So if I look at the agenda, it's just budget updates. There's a presentation. And will this committee be taking up the matters that were brought up during the public hearing, making a recommendation whether or not they will be in the 2024 budget? And will this committee then be approving a budget to pass on to county board? It's just not clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody online, Lynn? Thank you. Number 7, approve the minutes of the previous finance meeting on October 12th.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Hessel, second by Mr. Righeimer to approve. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Number 8, Finance Department report.
There was a handout that Ms. Janine Abrick gave to me late, so you have a printout of it at your stations there for the treasurer's report. She added that a little bit later.
Everybody had time to look at it? Got questions on it?
She does a good job.
She communicates with me a lot, and yes, I'd agree with that. And she's nice enough to send this to me prior so I can look at it and see if there's anything that needs to be changed. And I appreciate that. So let's move on. Mike?
All right, so sales tax in October was down about 11,000 from a year ago. We're still definitely on pace to make about it, and on pace to hit about 2.925 million. So still in good shape. Just a little bit down from one, but still very strong.
Thank you. Moving on to budget update, unless there are any questions on sales tax. We are 83% of the way through the year as of October 31st, 2 months left. Revenues are all tracking very well. A year ago, this time we were sweating a little bit with stumpage if we were going to make it or not. And in the end, we did all right. This year, we've virtually already hit the numbers, so that's good. That's one of our bigger revenues outside of property tax or sales tax. So it's always good when that's on.
Here's a question.
Course.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
And I don't know how it affected budget, but I hear a lot of these plants that are taking lumber are full. So I imagine in the future that might affect us somewhat.
It could affect us in the future. The forestry had a bid opening on Friday. Oh, thank you. Forestry had a bid opening on Friday. 26 sales. There were 26 sales and 10 of them no sailed, which isn't, according to forestry. I mean, it's the most down sale they've had in maybe 10 years now. So yeah, the markets, and we've been hearing this for a couple months, that like some of the mills that shut down weren't taking any wood. The long-term forecasts aren't real good, so that was reflected in the bids. Now with 10 no sales though, there were a number of sales that we've had out for a spring. They were put out in the spring or even last fall and had not sold, and now they have sold. So it's kind of a mixed bag. So I guess it could affect us I mean, like Mike said, I think we projected 1.8 million in this year in 23 budget, and we're already over 2. We project the same amount next year. So it could be touch and go like it was last year. It came out at the end. Our total book of sale though is really what we want to keep focusing on, and that is still where we want it to be. And that's the total amount of sales that we've put out and have been sold. And then the loggers have 3 years to cut them. So that number is still looking healthy.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
It is something we're keeping an eye on. Like Andy said, next year we should be okay, but the year after might start, unless things turn around, might start seeing some effect.
Thank you.
Yep.
Expenses are all in really good shape. So for general fund, we should be at 83%. Revenues, if I net out the fund balance draw, we're at 86%. So we're a little bit above where we should be. And the expenses net of the transfer to HHS are at 73%. So we're under the 83%. So we're, for this time of year, very good shape. Health and Human Services, they're running almost a balanced budget right now. Revenues equal expenses. They're both about 10 points under where we have the budget for. That's not atypical for HHS. So I'm just glad to see that we're running pretty level, because oftentimes grants lag a little bit in HHS. So we're looking very good in there. Highway Department, revenues are lagging a little bit, but the expenses are still under 83%. So as with all the winter, that we had last year and extra highway maintenance this year, we're still sticking to budget. So that's good news. Hopefully the revenues come in.
The commissioner shared last night with our first snowstorm. He's over.
Yeah.
Officially over budget for winter maintenance for the year now.
Yeah. And I knew we had one plowing before we would hit budget, but I think I've mentioned before, each one is about $23,000. So it doesn't take many to make a big impact. Any questions on 23? Before we jump into 24, I thought this might be a little bit shorter meeting. So I'm going to show you something I've been working on. So I'm going to share my screen here quick. Coming from public school, one thing I was used to having is a budget building model that projected out 5 years. Helps with decision making, because anything you do obviously has long-term effect. So what I've been doing is working on developing my own for counties. And I'm going to walk you through. It's going to be hard to see because it's a lot of information on a little screen. But this first tab I want to show you is the levy limit worksheet. So basically what I've taken is the one from the Department of Revenue, kind of created my own spreadsheet that calculates it out, and then projected that out 5 years. So I tested it with this year, and it came out exactly at what the Department of Revenue worksheet came out. So that was good. And then like I said, I projected out, I made some assumptions. I've got 1% plugged in for each of the net new constructions moving forward. The personal property aid hasn't changed in a number of years. The biggest factor that changes with this worksheet is the debt service, and that's down at the bottom here. So there are 2 ways we're affected. Our levy limit is affected by debt service. One is any increase or decrease, which is that one I've highlighted there, in basically the payment on any debt that was issued before 2005. And we do have one remaining prior to 2005 that was refunded once, but it still counts as a prior to 205 issue. 2024 is the last payment on that. So I've got the adjustment of $695. That what that is the payment for 24 is $695 higher than the payment for 23. We get to add that difference to our levy limit. Well, what's going to happen next year when I calculate it for 25 is then I have to actually deduct that total payment from 24. So that's going to be an adjustment there. That's this number you see right there. So that's actually a deduction. Then what I've done moving forward is the other factor then is anything that was put into place after July 1 of 2005. And our payment this year is that 1,700 or 1.725 million, basically, with how we're adjusting CIP with repaying it in the year in which we issue it to cut down on interest expense. That's going to be pretty flat moving forward. So this number you see in each of these columns after 2025 is the total amount of debt that will be issued after 2005. And I'll show you the debts. I've got a debt service tab, so I can show you what makes that up. But all of that calculates out to what our anticipated, again, this is budgeted, not necessarily what it will be, but what our allowable levy is going to be. And that's this line right here. And you can't see very well, but what it shows is, we don't get a lot of increase. It's about, basically comes down to that 1% net new construction that's allowed plus any change in debt service. And after 2 years, there won't be any change in debt service. So it's going to stay pretty level after that. Any questions on this tab? So then I've got this allowable levy feeding into another sheet, which feeds into the total levy, which then will feed into the general levy or the general fund revenues. This is the EMS levy. This one I can make a little bigger. So this just follows. The way I've set this up is I can change this number, make that 3%, and that'll carry through each of the years to recalculate kind of the operating portion of the levy. I kept indirect and allocated cost level because they have stayed pretty level now. And then the other change would be capital levy. And the one thing I've shifted in this versus what we've seen the last 5 or 6 years, and this I talked about last month at the budget hearing, is we are getting to a point where we probably don't need to do an ambulance every year. So got one in the budget for this year, skipping next year, putting one in again, 26. Basically, even years would have an ambulance itself, and the odd years would not. So that does have an effect on the bottom line EMS levy. And one thing we don't like doing is having a fluctuating mill rate overall. So I do have a little remedy for that too. Any questions on EMS? So then moving on to this. See if I can make this a little bigger. So then this one is an overall levy tab. It starts out with that operating levy that I showed you in the first tab. And then it just breaks it down by department that we send levy money to. So right now we break down our levy money, the operating levy among general fund, which is the biggest portion, health and human services, recreational officer gets a levy allocation, land and water conservation, and Nemacolin Transit, and then debt service. and then CIP, which we don't do it this way anymore, and then highway department. So that's the breakdown of what gets operating levy. And you can see it doesn't change a whole lot. This is what I added in to kind of offset the fluctuation in the EMS levy. And that would be just increasing highway maintenance levy every other year then on the offsetting year, basically in the amount of what an ambulance would cost. And I'll show you in a minute why I do that. And that does affect the operating levy then, because that would be part of debt service. I just put it in here as a separate line to show. And then the special purpose levy is basically made up of libraries, EMS, and the bridge aid that we get. So I kind of made some projections there. Basically a 2% increase across the board, with the exception of the ambulance, which goes up higher than that. And the EMS numbers pull from the other tab. So that gives me a total special purpose levy, add those two together, and I get a total levy. And then the reason I did that extra highway levy is if you look at the very bottom, and this is assuming for 25, about a 5% county valuation increase, and then only 1% after that. So thinking that, you know, we're still going to see a little bit of our housing boom, but then it's going to really slow down. And what I tried to do then is keep the levy mill, the levy tax levy rate level. And that's what this does. So by adding that highway levy in place of the ambulance levy, it keeps this the same. And the reason I like to do that is people can budget better if the taxes stay pretty much the same. If you have a lot of fluctuate, people notice that a little more. And we're not talking a lot. It would probably make 5 cents on $1,000. So for $200,000 home, that'd be $10. So it's not a big impact, but it's an impact. So then
I have a
moving.
question.
Sure.
And I suppose this is because the overall levy, but from the ambulance service for an ambulance, that can be outside. That's a special. What do you call it?
It is outside of
Yeah. Where the highway department is not outside. So you're just going by the overall budget, I guess.
well,
Make it
it's
balance.
both, because what I would propose would be more capital
Oh, okay.
on highway, which would go into CIP, which
Yeah.
would be outside then,
Okay.
would be through debt service.
All right.
So
Thank
it's a
you.
good question.
Just trying to figure out how to put together.
Yeah. So it's both. It's keeping the total taxes level, but it's also keeping our effect on the general fund level. Or consistent, I shouldn't say level, I guess. So then moving on to general revenues, and this one I won't spend a lot of time on. Some of these, like the stuff in green, is pulling from other tabs. That's a general tax levy. Otherwise, it's all the departments' revenues that show up. And I adjusted some accordingly. Some of them most of them I've left blank because that's not blank, but 0% increase because that's what people typically budget for. The thing, shared revenue, I put a little increase in, sales tax a little bit until we start seeing that level off. So basically, and then I come up with a general fund total revenue on the very bottom. That one I haven't spent a lot of time on. I don't have the expense side done yet. So this model isn't done. Hopefully by the end of this year, I'll have it done. Kind of spend some time on it here and there as I can. The expense side, when I'm trying to decide to do it, I'm looking at it two different ways. If I put all the expenses in that, you know, there's 1,000 lines or whatever. So I'm working on grouping it by category, like purchase services, supplies, that way, or by department to keep it consistent with the revenue. So I'm going to look at it both ways and see what makes more sense. Could be a mix of the two even. Salaries and benefits are in here as well too, broken down by fund. And then the general fund broken down kind of by category. So I've got admin, elected officials in their departments, departments that are not elected, sheriff, ambulance. Those are all in the general fund. Then I've got HHS, Parks and Rec, Land Conservation, Highway, and then grand totals. So any fund that has salaries in it, I've got it's kind of separated in the purple headings there. Because I'm focusing more on general fund, but eventually this will be built out to include all funds, or at least a summary of all funds. And again, here I can change any of these. We say, well, let's see what happens with salaries there at 2%. It calculates all out throughout the sheet. Same with any of these WRS, health insurance, any of that. Trying to keep it so that it's user-friendly and visible easier, so you don't have to scroll down a lot. And then this last tab that I've worked on is the debt service. I've put in our whole debt repayment schedule. The bar in the green up here are the different issues. Since this is a 5-year projection, I put in 5-year projections for CIP. And then it comes up to that total debt service levy payment that I mentioned earlier, where after next year, then it's 2.325 million. And that stays consistent. And this goes all the way down through the final payoff of the courthouse. And then I can always add issues in here too on the repayment schedule. So I'm hoping, coming from schools, we do everything data-driven decision making. I'm hoping to help us out with some data so that when we look at doing something, we can see the effect down the road too.
That helps a lot.
Any questions on that?
Just thank you for being proactive.
No, it's kind of my job.
As long as I've been on the board, we've not had this much data, so this is appreciated.
Oh, you're welcome. All right, then moving back to the budget update. I'm just presenting the budget again. It's up for you guys to discuss and decide. This will be a truncated version because, well, you all have heard it 4 times now with really minimal changes. So this will be the 5th time through. So I'll summarize. Sorry, I should have unshared. Okay. So just a summary of the levy again. The operating levy is going up little over $100,000 or 1.2% increase. Debt service levy, now that we're fully paying for the construction project, is going up a little more at 12%, a couple $100,000. Special purpose levies, a little bit of an increase. Most of that is due to, well, actually the biggest chunk of that is the bridge aid. That was about $30,000. So that's 2.29%. State charges went up a little bit. So total levy go up 385,000 or 2.75%. We've looked at that before. The next slide is the levy breakdown. I guess that last column's not that important. That just shows a percent of the budget. But this shows kind of a trajectory of each component of the operating levy. You can see general fund goes up a little bit each year. HHS, again, is pretty minimal. Rec officer took a little bit of a jump last year, went down a little bit this year. Land and waters, similar, well, exactly the same as last year. Nemacolin Transit, that is a direct levy and payment to them. So that shows a trajectory of where we have increased what we've given them. And then the debt service, again, with the construction repayment on the courthouse expansion, that's gone up the last 2 years. CIP, we don't run it through this way anymore. So that number will eventually drop off. And then highway department's seen pretty consistent increases in levy amount needed. And that comes up with your total operating levy. And again, that's a 2.7. Well, actually, that's not. That's only about just over 1% increase over last year, or 2%. Next slide. Further breakdown, this is the components of the special levy. And again, it's only 3 components. The library overall is actually a little bit down from last year because LCO saw quite a drop in their circulation numbers. Out of county went up a little bit. EMS operating capital. The operating is not going up much at all. Capital about 10,000. That's due to the increase in cost of a new ambulance and build up. And then the bridge aid did go up a little bit over last year, but really consistent with the 2 years prior. So all total, as we've mentioned before, it's about a 2.75% increase, 385,000, with the valuation going up 18.55%. The mill rate went down. But again, taxes didn't go down. Mill rate went down because the growth of the valuation increased more than the levy. Questions on that? This is the CIP. We've gone through this a couple times. It's unchanged from those two. This is the amount that we budgeted for in the debt issue that we did earlier this year. The 4 million included 1.5 million of 24 CIP. So we were able to fit into the budget there. Any questions on CIP? And then the outside organizations that we support. The only one that's a direct levy transfer is Nemacolin Transit. The rest of it are just coming out of general fund monies. The county fair, senior resource center, Hayward Lakes and Visitors Convention, Northwest Regional Planning, Economic Development Corp, and Clean Sweep, and another extension of cleanup there. So that shows a trajectory of the last few years there, and then the mill rate history going back.
Mike,
I have a
Yes.
question. So when, so state statute says who we can donate to. So I was just going to ask at this time, could you explain why we can't donate to the Waldo Center because it's not in state statute?
Right. So we had, after the board
Oh.
meeting.
Your mic.
Thanks. That was good. Just remembering. When we had the board meeting, after the board meeting, we had council look at a couple of the requests that had come in for budget assistance, specific to the Waldo Center. When they looked at the total request and what we were being asked for, they didn't find, anything within, like Stacy said, counties can participate or financially support what we are allowed to support. Statutes have to say that this is a role of the county. So, like a recreation center, we could not fund because it's not an operation of the county. We could operate one, but we can't provide funds to that entity. So Waldo's request is kind of I would say generic or general. So it would cover a potentially number of areas, but really the only one in there would be the senior meal program, which we're already funding a senior resource center for. So, I mean, the operation of a community center or just funding a kitchen would not be things that the county could support because it's not allowed by statute. We could fund a pro rata portion of the operation, but we'd have to determine what portion of it they're doing supports the senior meal program. And then we have to, go to the next step of looking at that we already fund a senior meal program that is already supported by the state. That they're already, GWAR, which is the state entity, is already supporting that area of the county through Senior Resource Center.
And then to piggyback on that, can I task you with making sure that I know that these are in the state statute, but if they're not up to par with their nonprofit status,
how do we vet them? Like, how do we make sure when they send in their budget request, are they including that they're up to standard, that they're not lacking
When we,
with DOR or with IRS or anything like that?
yeah, as of right now, when we instruct them to submit their request annually, they have to submit their budget and their financials. We don't require audits, but we, the ones that are audited to give us those. We've talked about making a part of our review. We can determine if they're in good standing as far as their corporate filings with the state. So we'll just make that part of our, before we disperse funds, we'll verify that they're in good standing.
Could we have that as a caveat to, we will give you these funds only if you're in good standing?
Sure.
Is that, Chairman, can we do that?
Yeah, I believe we can.
Okay. Sorry to give you extra work, but
No, it's not, I think it's a good step. We can make that part of our due diligence.
okay. Thank you. That's it. That's all I had on that.
All right. Moving on to courthouse fees. There's one cleanup item that we missed previously, and that is the second part of the dog licensing. It's just matching the dates again with the ones up above. And we clarified the fees there. It looked duplicative before because you have the multiple dog license, and then we had the fees that included the multiple dog license, so it looks like it was doubled. So we cleaned that up and took that $75 out of that to make it easier to understand.
And we made the fees align because the $75 is for multiple dog license tags. So we made the breakout of the period for collection and fees align with the single dogs, because before they were a 3-tiered breakout, now they're both only 2.
Mhm. So that is one change from the previous presentations. Any questions on that?
Just maybe I add a comment in. So just wanted the fee book, we tried to get it updated as part of the budget process so that it's updated and current as we go into next year, but it also doesn't lock it in place. So there might be, I know there are changes in some departments already being considered right now. Human Services just approved some fee adjustments at their meeting on Tuesday for next year. So we may end up bringing those fees will have to come through maybe in December then. We're not going to update this because we've had it out there for so long. No. Well, it does have something. It's not going to change. We're not going to change the budget or the document at this point, but yeah, it'll change the fee schedule for next year. So we'll change
Could change the
revenues.
actuals, not the budget.
Yeah.
Monthly CIP, again, another slow month. We did get a door at the airport, new entrance door. And I believe we've got windows coming too at some point. So it's just hard to get stuff purchased in 2023 still. So it's been slow. On the investment report, another good month. We are inching close to $1 million for the year, which is great. Investments are still strong, over 5%. You want to scroll down a little bit, Lynn? You can see now, because this report is always a month behind because we don't get bank statements in time to get it out prior to this meeting. But you can see now the ARPA money is basically down to the broadband and Draper helicopter pad. And then opioid, I believe we got another small settlement payment in since the last month's report. And LATCF, we actually got our second payment. So that amount has doubled now. So we've got some money in there. Outside of this, so the clerk of courts has their own bank account that is not part of the county depository. It was not gaining any interest at all, so Marge asked me to see what I could do. That account is with Franson, who we do have our main depository with. So I talked to them and they were able to give us interest on that account now. It's not quite what we're getting on the county holdings, but we also would like to invest some there to get a better return. So what we would like is if that could fall under this committee, even though it's not a actual county depository. So that's just something for this team's consideration.
What kind of money are we talking?
We've got about $500,000 typically in there, give or take.
Could you explain why it's separated from the county? Maybe that'll help.
I don't know exactly. I know statutorily, any interest that's earned has to revert to the county. But I don't know if it's statutorily it has to be separate from the county, but it is. The only part I know is if we gain interest, that does come to the county. It's basically a holding for bonds. So, you know, a lot of the time it's repaid. For whatever reason, there has been a buildup. Like if I look at the balance versus what we have outstanding to be reimbursed, there's a gap of 125,000 or so over the years. I suppose that's from bonds that didn't have to be returned, I would guess.
So you need a motion for that.
Yeah, we'd have it fall under our investment policy and bring it here for changes then.
What was the role of the judge in that? Like, this is,
The judge has to approve
yeah,
any investing too. That's statutory as well.
I think that's one of the reasons it's still held by the county in the county's name, but it's separate is because it's at the discretion of the courts.
So what would the committee like to do? We let them invest it so we can get interest back, more interest, or they were getting no interest?
They were getting none. Now they're getting, I think, 3%, which we can do better, obviously, with CDs. We can't roll it into our money market account and get what we're getting, but
Right.
we could invest it in other stuff outside of Franson.
Right.
If need be. Or a CD within Franson.
This has,
I was just gonna ask, do we have to do that now or can we approve it at the December meeting so we can
Yeah. I'd
have more
have to
time to
have-
digest it? Can we put that on the agenda for December?
yes.
Yeah, we're getting interest now, just we could
Mhm.
do better. So it's
Mhm.
better than it was, not as good as it could be.
Yeah.
And a lot of it has to be liquid because it could be on demand. But there is a margin where we could invest and get a better return. Why would we do that?
Well, I'm saying because it's a separate account. I don't know. I just want to make sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing in the alignment. If it's an account that we're holding, then that's different than if it's a separate account. I don't know, like, if you should be tasked with that. And so I just want to review it before we make that decision. I mean, I would like to just approve the budget and do what we're supposed to do with that. And then extra things can come next month,
Mhm.
not be added into this discussion.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
I have another question. I don't know where it would fall in, but I'll ask you anyway, if I may. You're looking at going to PTO time compared to vacation and sick. Is that gonna affect anything dollar wise?
The way we're proposing it, we're not increasing our liabilities at all. I mean, we're already paying the employees. We're not going to pay them anymore. Potentially, there could be. We're not going to increase their. Right now, they can accrue time, and when they retire or are eligible for retirement, they can.
Payout.
We're not increasing the caps on that at all, or the payout structure of those.
Thank you. Just wondering how it was gonna come into play.
Mhm.
Is there a time we're gonna start that?
Well, if we do, it'd be hopefully January 1st. But yeah, I have that on for the admin committee. presented to them. It's been provided to the department heads to talk to their employees. So, I mean, we've gotten some positive, some negative feedback. So, and I honestly, I'm hearing more from the negative so far. But I want to introduce it to the admin to see if the thoughts there. If everybody thinks it's a horrible idea, we can stop. But yeah, it's not. We've structured it so there's no increase in cost or future liabilities to the county.
Okay, thank you. What else you got, Mike?
The next thing, I don't know if you were able to go through the information I sent on Ampersand. That is an investment company. And the reason I'm bringing this forward is we previously approved a third investment company. The president and CEO of that company has left, started a new company, and the top 5 executives went with that person. So my comfort level with who we had approved is not as strong as it used to be. I'm sure they're still good, but just with the uncertainty of banking right now, in the last 15 months, we've seen some bank failures. I think knowledge in what's going on and maybe seeing some things that could happen is pretty important. Even though it's all FDIC insured and everything, just as far as maximizing rates and having security deposits, I would feel more comfortable going with Ampersand than who we had previously approved. Not a vital thing, just a comfort level, I guess, for me.
So we need a motion on that?
That would be a motion.
I'd make a motion that you can make that change. I think it's important that you're comfortable with who you're working with. Sounds like a bunch left, more than just one person too, so.
I'll second the motion.
Motion by Mr. John Regenheimer and second by Ms. Hessel to approve the change in investment.
Chair, I have a question.
Further discussion?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
It's not on discussion on this item, so I'll wait.
Did you have something, Tom? So we're good with the motion? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Chair, can we go back to the budget? Do we need to approve that to bring it to the full board on Tuesday night? There's not, generally, that's what we've done in the past.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's probably a good idea because that way it's got the recommendation of the finance committee. Good thinking. What do you think?
Can't hurt.
I'll make a motion to approve the budget for 2024 as presented by Mr. Markren.
I'll second that.
Clarify to bring it to the full board. I don't know if I said that.
Motion by Ms. Hessel, second by Ms. Regenheimer to present the budget as it is presented to us today. Move it on to the full county board on November 14th, which is a Tuesday reminder.
Right, next Tuesday.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thanks for pointing that out. Yes.
Just one other budget comment and follow up to the discussion we had about Waldo when the council reviewing it. We also had council involved with the town of Edgewater request, in part from the meeting, but also the town's attorney had reached out to our attorney to discuss it. They did have a meeting or a conversation, and there was, I think, after the first meeting at least, the town's council needed to go back and talk to the town because not all the information they had come to the table with was accurate, and so they were going to go back and talk to the town. And I think as of yesterday, we're trying to set up another meeting with the town and their attorney and our attorney and myself to, I guess, discuss and see what the town is requesting. I don't know what their angle is with having an attorney involved, if there's some legal issues. But there was just nothing, there's conversation, but nothing really, as of right now.
Yes.
Thank you for making that extra effort, because I think it'd be nice just to have that clarification for everybody instead of, because otherwise we're going to have every EMS near another EMS backing out. So I think it's a trickle effect that we have to be careful of.
Mike, number 10.
All right, moving on to ambulance billing analysis. This is now looking at October through September, 12-month cycles. Looking at the aging report. All right, there we go. So remember last month I mentioned that it looked a little different than previous months. Well, I looked into a little bit, and actually John reached out to our billing company, and what happened is we had August billings were really low compared to both July and September. So that caused the current amount to go way down in August. So that's why that had dropped. So like any of the stuff we look at, this is nice looking month to month, but we really want to be looking more year at a glance to kind of really get a feel, or at least to look at trends. And the trend still is that we're better than we were as far as the current percentage. It's been down the last 2 months, but I'm not alarmed yet until we see a trend of that happening longer than a couple months, because we've had just some fluctuation. So I just wanted to point that out on the aging schedule. The number of calls per month by 12-month cycle. Again, we're making headway. We had a large October that moved to October of the previous year now. So that skewed the data a little bit, because that was a very strong billing, very strong high count. So that and I've mentioned that before. We're about a year and a half into LifeQuest now. So it's not as cut and dried looking at these, seeing, well, yeah, there's a big change coming to the new company, because now the previous year is 50-50, the old company and the new company. And actually more than that, because we switched in January, we just didn't get any billings until April. So we're going to start seeing more and more smoothing out between the 2 years. But it's still valuable to look at this. It's valuable to look at the prior 3 years and 1920 as a baseline year as well, how we compare to that. So that's more what I'm looking at as this goes along. The average build, again, we're up from last year, not where we were, but our call volume is down quite substantially from where it was in 1920 as well. The collected per call, that's where we're seeing the effect of the new company, I feel, because even though 21-22 is more of a split between the previous company and this company, there still is a large gap. And we're getting closer to our benchmark year of 1920, and actually almost at the 3-year rolling average. So that's encouraging. The percent collected, again, that's where we're seeing that this is working. If I look month to month percent, the data is not that meaningful, because I'm looking at what's collected that month, but the billing actually happens that month. The collected could be over, the previous month, could be 12 months prior, one that came in late. But when you look at it for a full 12-month period, it's getting to be more accurate. So getting up to 40%, I feel for Sawyer County is a pretty strong number. I know kind of a benchmark is 50%. I think with our population higher, maybe on Medicare, Medicaid, I don't think we're ever going to get 50. So I think 50 is a good number to shoot for, or 40 is a good number to shoot for. And we're hovering right around that. The amount billed and collected per month, this is where it's really strong, is the amount per call is right where we were 3 years ago. billing's almost there, but what we're collecting is there. This is a new slide now. And this is ambulance calls by township. This is something you guys have asked for previously. Just kind of shows where our calls are going. And when you look at this, City of Hayward's number 1, town is number 2. You know, you'd expect that, but there really are kind of circles. Like the closer you get to our main station that's also the concentration of the population of Sawyer County, but that is the highest. Bass Lake is right here too. Winter, I think, just for the sheer land mass of their township is why they're number 4. And then Sand Lake again is pretty close. The further you get removed, the lower number of calls we see going out. Is that useful information?
Yeah, it is. And an example, Draper, would they have 12 calls? And how far is Draper from the Ojibwa ambulance garage compared to Town Edgewater? It's farther. Yeah.
What's the average cost? Call. Is there an average, what do you figure on the cost of the call? Mileage to the hospital?
Pretty late.
Well, I don't know that offhand, but it's both. Like when I look at these reports, there's a report for cost of calls, and then there's a mileage one underneath it. So, I mean, it's both. Obviously, if it's further, we're getting more because of the mileage, but there must be a base cost, right, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, there's a base cost and mileage are your biggest expenses, but then it's the services that are performed on the ambulance as well that add into the cost. Yeah.
And what percent of the calls are covered by insurance?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I don't know if I can give that one off the top of my head. I mean,
No.
Xmas report.
yeah, well, I don't know if you have in the slide, do you have the one that shows the
Well, actually, to answer your question,
payers?
the average bill per call is $1,468. So that
Okay.
would be the average that we're billing out. I don't know if that's,
Yeah, and this is one I was thinking of for insurance. You can see who the payers are for.
yeah,
call.
this is actually another new slide. So this is the call summary and all it's being paid for. And I would not have guessed this, that private is by far the number 1. But it is.
Well, part of that's the poverty area we live in, so they don't have insurance, I would presume.
Yeah, don't have insurance and aren't eligible for Medicare or Medicaid. Because Medicare is the number 2
Mhm.
and MA is number 3.
It's just kind of interesting information to have.
Good to share that. Thank you.
Yeah.
There's a couple pages of that. And then the last one is the one you've seen the last 2 or 3 months. And that's the aging summary and where they are. And anything that says latitude is a collection agency. So there's a fair amount of those.
How long do they wait before they send it out to collections? Do we know?
That I don't know. It must vary because there's an amount in there for current.
Wouldn't it sometimes if they're making payments to the insurance, perhaps it would
Yeah.
delay going to collections,
Yeah.
perhaps.
Just looking at this, there's nothing in the 31 to 60 months, so my guess would be after 60 months or 60 days
Yeah.
is when they send it to collection.
Good. Yeah.
Just what Lynn just pulled up based on some requests at prior
Yeah.
meetings. We're just gonna start adding the ambulances, report to public safety into this agenda in case there's any, somewhat consistent every month. He tries to break down calls by township. In a couple months, he included transfers where they were coming from or how much each ambulance is running. So this one, it's pretty similar to what Mike just showed you as far as,
I think this has an additional month. it looks
Yeah.
like.
they're not always going to be, the billing report versus John's report aren't always going to be exact because they're pulling from two different sources. Sometimes there's a run that's not billed, so there'll be a little, by and large, they're the same, but they're not going to be always identical.
I like that report. Thank you. Moving on. Future agenda items. So we'll have,
Quicker court.
thank you. Does anybody else have anything else they would like to have come forward with? Yes.
No, I just would like to say that I really, really appreciate all this extra details that are presented. And I don't know if they get the kudos enough for presenting it so we can make the right decisions, really like the 5-year projection. We've not had that before either. So it's awesome. Thank you.
Agree. It's very helpful. Did you have something else, Tom?
No,
Dale? Correspondence reports. You asked what's going on at the airport. So briefly, I'll tell you what's going on. They're put together a master plan every 5 years.
But this is it's been longer there's not a 5-year requirement, but that's probably the average. It's been well more than 5 years
Yes.
since. But now the BOA FAA are requiring every airport to go through the master plan process within the next 5 years.
So that's what's going on. Probably the biggest thing right now is this master plan. They put together a committee. We have one representative on there, is Mark Helwig. And they've had 2 meetings so far. There's planning it for another 2 meetings. There's no exact date. They plan on it in February. And then it'll come to the Public Works Committee when they put together the plan, see if the Public Works wants to accept it, and then it would come to the full board once it gets to that point. Does that help understand?
is there any major changes they're looking at or?
Yeah. Potentially. I think there's a perception, or maybe when you go through a planning process, people expect that there's going to be changes as a result of it. And that might happen, but that's not the reason for the master plan. The master plan is just to put together kind of a part of it is a look in time as to where your airport's at, what's happening there, and then anything that you need to start planning for in the future. So it's not meant to be an expansion plan, but I think some people feel that it probably will be. And so I've given out Ms. Hessel's contact information a few times because she's the county board supervisor in that area.
Mhm.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I've been getting a lot of letters. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So, the thing I've said is it's not an expansion plan, it's a master plan. But based on what we heard yesterday was the second meeting of the kind of the committee that's been put together to work through the process. And then there will be some public forums where the public will be shared the information that's been gathered and what's kind of, on the table for the airport. And I would say that whether we planned for it or not, the airport is expanding as we speak. It's been expanding without any changes there, just in the amount of traffic that's coming in, the size of the traffic. And that, kind of what we learned yesterday even is, if you wanted to lengthen your runway, say, we don't have a long enough runway for the planes that say they'll fly in here, you need to show 500 operations annually to justify to the FAA a runway expansion. The other viewpoint though is we might be getting to the point where we have planes landing here that are going to be 500 operations, which are going to create a liability if we don't improve some safety features of the airport in the future. And I'm not saying lengthen runway, actually. It's more the safety threshold or the clear zones and those types of things. So people that have been using the airport are getting bigger planes. And that's one of the things that that has kind of been turned up as part of the master plan process. If you're interested to see, it's all, while the master plan meetings are not really public participation, there's like a user group and the consultants are all part of that master plan process. Everything is online. It's SawyerCounty.airportstudy.net. And it has all the data that they've been pulling together for the last 6 months.
So is this a cause and effect of having the Jack Links there?
Yep.
And then also does the director know of the process? Because people have been talking to him, the airport director, and he's telling them that there's an expansion. They're worried about the river. I mean, obviously that's going to be affected. So they're worried about the neighborhood surrounding the airport. I mean, granted,
Yep.
they moved there knowing there was an airport, but they didn't realize it would be as big as it's getting. So, but when they've gone in, he said, well, we're expanding, we're making it bigger. So I think that there's some miscommunication there.
Yeah.
That maybe needs to be noted and addressed.
Yeah, we did touch on some of that yesterday and last night. I mean, we're not out, we're not committed to an expansion or buying property or anything like that. I mean, the process will be there's a meeting in February, another meeting of the master plan group, and then the public forum, and then probably another one June-ish, same scenario. And then at that point, the plan probably will be wrapped up and turned over to the Public Works Committee and then to the county board.
So could I encourage you to do maybe an article in the newspaper just explaining just do a PR piece on explaining what's happening? I think that might eliminate the confusion.
Just to share a little bit, last night we had Public Works and I didn't count them, there's 7 or 8 people here and they were all concerned about they heard expansion. When we talked to the airport manager, he says he has not been telling them about expansion.
Yeah. And I'm picking my words carefully because it's not intended. It wasn't set out as an expansion. We didn't start this process to justify or lead to an expansion. Like Mike said, part of what we're doing is like Mike's doing with the budget is the airport's assembling data to make data decisions. And ultimately the data might lead to some expansion discussion though.
Is the runway long enough to handle any planes that use the airport? Do you have to expand the length of the runway or?
Yes. The runway is long enough. Could it be longer? I mean, everything that's landing there can land on the length of the runway, but what's going to come into play, like some of these bigger, we're getting into a higher class, it's weight, width, and then safety thresholds. So while the runway is long enough, you might need longer thresholds at the end of the runways for clear zone or safety areas for should planes land early or go long.
Or isn't there some kind of deterrent where you could say you can only be this big to land in our airport? You don't want to do that. Okay, got it.
Well, we can't. I mean, you put your airport out there and this is how long it is. This is the safety thresholds. And then they have to decide if they can land there or not.
Well, with respect to the river and the trails on the other side, I think we just have to do our due diligence. I get it, the economic factor, but I'd hate to lose residents on that road.
And I'm getting a lot of them emails also. We will be addressing it the best we can as we move forward. Anybody else have anything else? Good job, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.